high desert in the great American Southwest. I bid you all good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be in the world's prolific time zones. Every single one of them covered by this program, Coast to Coast AM. I'm Art Bell. My honor and privilege to be escorting you through this holiday weekend. I suspect quite a number of you able to stay up later than usual tonight, and it's a good thing because Paul Stonehill is going to be here. It's going to be a UFO-centric kind of show tonight, actually, talking about what's happened in Russia. You know, now that the Iron Curtain has fallen and is being sold as souvenirs, why, all the information coming out of Russia after all these years is pretty interesting stuff, and they've got a lot of it, and Stonehill will report on it. Now, how many of you have heard of the Prophet Yahweh? I think George interviewed him the end of last week, Friday or something. You know, normally, my inclination with this kind of thing, the Prophet Yahweh calling down UFOs and all this kind of stuff, is just give me a blinking break. However, Channel 13 Television in Las Vegas, they're good people. I know a bunch of them, and they took the Yahweh story, I guess, seriously enough to send some intrepid reporter out and stand with Yahweh while he attempted to call down some UFOs. Well, he did. And Channel 13 got the video. And I don't know what, you don't say any more than that. I mean, other than give me a blinking break, you gotta give him credit. The guy did it or got unbelievably lucky or something, but sure as hell, it's quite a clear UFO, very similar to the second UFO my wife and I saw, a disc, and it flitted about as no normal craft really could. So I don't know what to say. They caught it on film. You can go to the Channel 13 website in Las Vegas and see it for yourself. Word is, this will be followed now by a whole flurry of UFO sightings in the Las Vegas area. I could certainly consider myself in that area, even a little closer to Area 51. So I guess it's coming over the next week, if this is any indication. World news. What do you say about the French, huh? French voters soundly rejected the European Union's first constitution Sunday. A stinging repudiation of President Jacques Chirac's leadership and the ambitious decades-long effort to unite the continent. Chirac, who had urged voters to approve the charter in the bitterly contested referendum, announced the result in a brief televised address, said the process of ratifying the treaty would continue in other EU countries, but the French people are... I don't know what to say about the French. Their capital, Paris, is lovely. Ramona and I love it. But the French people, boy, I'll tell you, the French people, very independent. Iraq police fought pitched battles with insurgents Sunday as thousands of security forces, backed by American troops, swept through Baghdad's streets to flush out militants responsible for, as you know, killing more than 720 people now since Iraq's new government was announced back in April. Insurgents lashed back. They killed 30, including a British soldier, and a senior U.S. military intelligence official acknowledges now there are very few indications that they are, quote, packing their bags, end quote. Kind of world we live in. 6 people, including 2 children, were found shot to death Sunday in neighboring farmhouses. Investigators believe one of the dead was responsible for all the killing. The same family owned both houses on a farm of several hundred acres. 2 bodies were found in one farmhouse and 4 found in another. There's a current book out about the end of the world, and Ramona will step in here any second and remind me of who. I just read it and handed it to her, and it's one of the most unique end-of-the-world books that you'll read, and it's a kind of a, without telling you, and it is The Taking by Dean Koontz, thank you. What can I say about it? It's what a lot of people, religious people, I think, believe is going to happen, or maybe it'll happen this way. Several of the world's leading international disease experts are calling for more international cooperation and a new kind of vaccine to prepare for a global flu outbreak that could strike 1/5 of the world's population and kill millions. Since an outbreak has long been called inevitable, once a flu virus circulating in birds infects people, and then just mutates a little bit so that it passes easily between people, while bird-to-human infections have, as you know, been happening in Asia, they have not yet spawned a major spread of the virus person to person. Even an optimistic estimate now says a worldwide outbreak could sicken 30 million people, enough to go to the hospital, kill about a quarter of those patients. Researcher Albert Osterhaus of the Medical Center in Rotterdam said the Netherlands and colleagues write in Thursday's edition of the journal Nature. Other experts are saying, get ready, prepare for a global outbreak called a pandemic. Now, here's a headline for you. Chinese government admits to massive epidemics as World Health Organization granted sweeping new powers over all nations and peoples on Earth. Reports have reached us this morning confirming the recent reports of Russian scientists. This originally came from Russian, Pravda, stating that China has been battling numerous epidemics and they have not been reported to the World Health Organization. After stonewalling for weeks, China acknowledged Friday that 2 epidemics had spread among its animal and bird populations, renewing questions about its readiness to provide prompt information about infectious disease. In other words, they don't tell. The belated announcement came amid fresh criticism that China's disease surveillance system is inadequate to deal with an avian flu virus that scientists say may turn into a global pandemic amongst humans. These stories just keep coming.
I'm a woman.
The following story purportedly comes from Czech E-Zine Black Ice, issue number 1, Sydney, Australia. Now, prepare yourself. This has got a sort of a regusting rating of near 10. Oceanographic scientists say they have discovered a vast floating reef of the world's disposed condoms in the middle of the South Pacific, about halfway between Tahiti and the Antarctic. The phenomenal mass is almost 2 miles long, an eighth of a mile wide, and in places up to 60 feet deep. Mason Frowell, the Australian marine biologist at his country's oceanographic laboratory outpost on Marquay Island, South Pacific, said the bizarre accumulation is explained by a scientific term called like aggregation. Like aggregation, remember that. That is the massing of similar objects over short or even longer periods of time due to wind or ocean currents, magnetic fields, buoyancy, and other conditions probably we can't even guess at. It's fairly common in the world's oceans, he said. Natural events, like red tides, for example, are instances of like aggregation. People with pets that shed lots of hair can see it in their very own homes. Frowell said the dog sheds everywhere in the room, but after falling out, the fur soon collects in a few clumps and masses, like aggregation. Frowell said ocean reefs of styrofoam and detergent residues have been observed in the South Pacific and everywhere else for many years, but they're usually broken up by storms before they become large or hazardous. He believes the huge concentration of condoms, not previously reported, is more resilient than other aggregating stuff and may have been developing for decades. Frau said parts of the newly discovered reef are matted together so densely that you could almost land a plane on it. He said, quote, I suppose it'd be funny. It would be funny if it didn't pose the hazard it does to marine life and navigation. Frau said, I'd pity any freighter, submarine, or dolphin, for that matter, that might run into it. The biologist said that he and his Australian scientific colleagues will have the reef mapped by satellite and monitored from now on to see if it expands, breaks up, or drifts from its current location, reportedly at 63 degrees latitude and 154 degrees longitude, Frau said. There wouldn't be much point in trying to break up the pulpy mass with explosives or, oh my God, other devices. It seems pretty indestructible, said he. The world's industrialized nations are estimated to consume and dispose of nearly 300 million condoms per year. Industry analysts say about a third of those discards become waterborne. And so then they aggregate. Now, my wife Ramona pointed out after she finished laughing about all of this that it is true. If you, as a human being, walk into an empty movie theater and sit in a conveniently good place to see the screen just right, inevitably, the very next person coming in will come in an empty theater and sit right down next to you, probably sneezing and hacking and coughing. Well, that I understand. That's a matter of human behavior, I think. Or is it? Are we humans no different than floating condoms? Do we aggregate? I said no, there's got to be a difference. Inanimate objects. I can understand human behavior. That's laughing coming from the other room. Humans have brains, and they do what they do. But I mean, inanimate objects. How do they do that? NASA scientists say they have made the first sighting of what could be the ultimate July 4th firework. Now, remember, folks, a comet called Tempel 1, the camera was aboard a spacecraft called Deep Impact, closing in on the comet's track, and on April 25th, at a distance of 39.7 million miles, it caught the first reflected light from its prey. That's right, you see, it's sneaking up on it. Deep Impact is going to intercept the 4-mile-wide comet and fire a 39-inch copper projectile into it, while the two close at 6.3 miles per second on Independence Day. And they're going to film the whole event for excited scientists back here on Earth, 83 million miles away. Dust and debris and the size of the hole in the comet will answer questions about the makeup of these mysterious visitors. Some people think it's a bad idea to be exploding comets. Somehow or another, the new orbit after impact, well, you just know, if it's like the movies, will be quickly calculated to be Manhattan. New NASA Administrator Mike Griffin, visiting Kennedy Space Center the other day, has made it clear the shuttle is going to get replaced, and soon, too. Quote, I report to the President, he told the press. The President has said we're retiring the orbiter by 2010, and that's just what we're going to do. The agency should have a transition plan ready by summer's end, he said, that would outline how much of the International Space Station might actually be finished by the time the shuttles are finished. Now, I don't know if this is the answer or not, but I feel compelled to read it to you. You know, there is a mystery in Death Valley of rocks, big rocks, moving along the floor of Death Valley at night, mysteriously. And Bob in San Diego writes, Dear Art, after hearing you describe the moving desert rocks as an unsolved mystery, I just had to write to let you know what a friend of mine discovered. These moving rocks are generally found on dry lake beds, which have a high content of evaporated salt. So, when it rains in the desert, the lake beds absorb the moisture and the salt partially dissolves. The rocks are then partially buoyed up by the high brine content slush, which also lowers the friction between the rocks and the lake bed. Then the wind blows across the lake. Sufficient force is generated to overcome the friction between rocks and the bed to allow the rocks to move fairly long distances. Mystery solved. Well, maybe, Bob, but we also get rocks moving down at the bottom of Death Valley on windless nights. How would that occur? After 35 years in prison for stealing a black and white TV set, Junior Allen is now a free man. Allen, 65 years of age now, walked out of prison Friday, ending a case that attracted widespread attention because he remained in jail while other inmates convicted of murder, rape, child molestation all came and went. Said he, "I'm glad to be out. I've done just too much time for what I did. I won't be truly happy until I see a sign that says I'm out of North Carolina." Allen was a 30-year-old migrant farm worker from Georgia with a criminal history that included burglaries and a violent assault when he sneaked into the unlocked house, stole a 19-inch black and white TV set worth $140. Some state records say Allen roughed up the 87-year-old woman who lived there, but he was never convicted of that. Instead, he was sentenced in 1970 to life in prison for second-degree burglary. The penalty for the offense since has been changed to a maximum of 3 years in the pokey. The State Parole Commission decided last year to release Allen if he behaved and completed a transition work release program. Well, he worked at a restaurant, washing dishes and floors, had no prison infractions during the past 3 years, and so now he's out early. It would be his 26th try at parole. So including 5 years of that, he could gain complete freedom by age 70. All this for a TV, for a black and white TV. The joke in-house is, how much time would he have gotten if he'd stolen a color TV? A woman in a hot air balloon realized she was lost. She lowered altitude and spotted a man in a boat below. She shouted to him, "Excuse me, can you help me? I promised a friend that I'd meet him an hour ago, and I don't know where I am." The man consulted his handy portable GPS and replied, "Why, you're 30 feet above sea level. You're at 31 degrees, 14.97 minutes north latitude, and 100 degrees, 49.09 minutes west longitude." She rolled her eyes and said, "You've got to be a Democrat." "I am," the man replied. "How'd you know?" "Well," answered the balloonist, "everything you told me is technically correct, but I have no idea what to do with your information, and I'm still lost, frankly. You've not been much help to me." The man smiled and responded, "Well, you must be a Republican." "I am," replied the balloonist. "How'd you know?" "Well," said the man, "you know where you are. You don't know where you are or where you're going. You've risen where you are due to a large quantity of hot air. You made a promise that you have no idea how to keep. Then you expect me to solve your problems. You're in exactly the same position you were in before we met, but somehow now it's my fault." So you see, every now and then, I am somewhat political. All right. This night we will, that's about as far as I go. We'll take your calls. Anything you would like to talk about is kind of fair game and open lines. At the top of the hour, as I explained, Paul Stonehill will be here. He'll talk about the Tunguska explosion. I think that's an extremely mysterious explosion in that, it knocked down trees for a 40-mile circle at least. I mean, just flattened them, right? Those trees are all gone, but without a crater. So the size of the explosion would indicate that it would be something large enough to hit the Earth and create a crater as we have in Arizona, right? But no. I wonder if scientists have looked very carefully for some kind of residual radiation My guess being that it could have been something other than what we thought. And also the amount of energy released to Tunguska is incredibly more than you would expect from a mid-air explosion of that magnitude. I mean, the whole event is pretty weird. But then again, so are a lot of other things that are going on in Russia. And tonight's guest is an expert on things that have gone on in Russia during the secretive years when they didn't tell us. Well, now they're telling us, and some of it is pretty wild stuff. That's what we're going to be covering tonight. But coming up next, all of you will throw the lines open. From the high desert in the middle of a kind of a neat night, I'm Art Bell.
Sign up for Streamlink at www.coasttocoastam.com, and you can hear tonight's show over and over and over.
Baby on a shoulder, the sun is setting like molasses in the sky. One sing, we had a moon, everything, always wanting more, feeling and longing for, like velvet and that little boy's smile, like velvet.
Everybody, I'm Art Bell, and if you'll only listen very carefully, I've got the telephone numbers so that you can get on the show if you've got something intriguing to tell us all about. They're a little bit different on the weekend, so listen very closely.
To talk with Art Bell, call the wildcard line at area code 775-727-1295. The first-time caller line is area code 775-727-1222. To talk with Art Bell from east of the Rockies, call toll-free at 800-825-5033. From west of the Rockies, call Art at 800-618-8255. International callers may reach Art Bell by calling your in-country Sprint access number, pressing option 5, and dialing toll-free 800-893-0903. From coast to coast and worldwide on the Internet, this is Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell.
Imagine being an American submarine commander and having come back to base and explain to the Pacific Command that your submarine is limping back into base because it collided with a giant mountain of congealed, gathered condoms. Incidentally, there are photographs to go with the Stonehill story tonight, UFO photographs that we've got up on the website. So you really might want to take a look at that, as well as mentioning again this Yahweh thing. Crazy, I admit, absolutely crazy. However, I mean, there it is. It's astounding. It really did happen. They really did catch the video. He stood there and prayed for the UFOs, and there they came. So a couple of people have complained they can't find the video. I was sending the link around to some friends, so it is up there. I'm just not sure where. So Channel 13, somebody tell Channel 13 to get that out there prominently. First time caller line, you're on the air. Hi.
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 First time caller, great show, love it.
Thank you.
Doing a great job, and I hope you get on 5 days a week sometime.
Well, I've had that experience. Where are you, sir?
California.
California. And your first name?
Wayne.
Okay, Wayne. So what else is up?
I was wondering, like, how come there's been no mainstream media coverage of the Brazilians coming out with their UFO knowledge and everything?
Okay, let me try and answer that. The American media, for the most part, is brain dead. We have a very interesting. We were having a long discussion last night after the program with some friends about the American media in general, and it is an odd bunch. And they do every now and then run UFO stories, but what the gentleman just referred to, Brazil actually making everything public, is a monstrous story, and they haven't touched it. So I really don't know how to tell you about the American media, except to say that if one of them, one of the major services should pick it up, then suddenly it will be everywhere. And that gives you, I guess, an insight into the pack nature of the media. What one does, they all do. So I don't have a better answer than that. It's just sort of a pack mentality out there, and until it makes one of the big ones, then it just doesn't make it. That's all there is to it. Wildcard line, you're on the air. Hi.
Good evening, Art. This is Blair in Sedona.
Yes.
Peter Gersten, the UFO lawyer, forwarded me this thing today. Actually, it's called Gear Up for Deep Impact Comet Crash, and it tells who can see it at the best location and time.
Yes.
And it happens to be the folks in the westernmost region of North America, us, around 11 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time on July 3rd. And it's supposed to...
On July 3rd?
Well, this is going to be... It'll be 4th of July for people on the East Coast. You have 3 hours.
Gotcha. Okay. Right.
And you look low in the southwestern sky in the constellation of Virgo, about 3.5 degrees northeast of the bright stars. It's Spica or Spica?
I don't know.
It's one of those stars.
One of those bright ones.
Yeah, and of course, I'd like to reiterate my prediction I made of number 68 about this is a bad thing to do on your New Year's Eve program.
Yes, I join you in that view. Just somehow or another, maybe I've read too much science fiction, but doggone it, always after something like this, then the scientists, everybody's going, oh, and then some guy over in the corner is doing a little calculation. Wait a minute. Look, Manhattan.
Well, yeah, there's some folks that believe it's by design a part of the electrical circuitry of our solar system, like a nerve synapse, and energetically it could be devastating. It's like a resonance or bouncing ball effect. Besides fires, there could be financial disruptions, various diseases. I don't mean to be doom and gloom, but come on, folks, let's not shoot first and ask questions later.
All right. Thank you very much for the call, and yes, he did make a New Year's prediction about this very event. I don't know that I buy into the sort of resonating domino effect. I don't think I buy into that, but inevitably something goes wrong with, schemes like this. East of the Rockies, you're on the air. Hello.
Good evening, Art. My name is Don from Copley, Pennsylvania, near Allentown. I hope I can mention two things. I know time is short. You mentioned about the flu stories and that they just keep coming.
Yes.
And I find it fascinating then also to get the other side of the story in a way from John Rappaport, who seems to think that these stories are just like a con. You know what I mean? So it's
I don't think they're like a con at all. I think that they know damn well it's going to happen. They just know. I mean, they can see the beginning of changes in this virus, and they have seen clearly what it can do to birds, and now we're getting the reports from China on the size of the epidemics going on, just among the animal population there that they've been hiding. No, I think this is real.
That's unfortunate. As I said, I wanted to mention one other thing, and I wondered if you or even any of your listeners had any experience with the twin coil ferrite AM antenna with the CC Radio Plus. I have the CC Radio Plus, and Oh, I have a dickens of a time with an adjacent station when I'm trying to get my Baltimore Orioles, who were in first place, and I wondered if you had used the twin coil.
Yeah, it's wonderful for that. It's got a very high Q. So such a high Q that you can virtually annihilate an adjacent station. So yeah, it works. It really works.
Boy, I would. That would be something because I use a regular, a select antenna, and I wonder if you, as I say, you or anybody else may feel that the twin coil does a better job than just a regular select antenna.
I would use both.
Oh,
absolutely use both. Of course, there's nothing like the select antenna for incredible gain. It's the most amazing device I've ever used. How about you?
I have found it fascinating. I mean, I use it with, as I said, the CC Radio Plus, even the Yacht Boy 400. Oh, well, many other radios, too numerous to mention on this show.
The select antenna is a unique device. It actually was the first thing the Sea Crane Company ever sold. And it was originally invented as an aircraft direction finder, believe it or not. And they found out, oh my God, look what it does with a radio. And so they modified it a little bit. And it doesn't use batteries. It doesn't use anything like that. It's just a large inductive antenna that couples. You put it next to your radio and tune it. And, it'll increase your sensitivity, your radio sensitivity, many times. You will hear things you would never hear otherwise.
Oh, I agree. I pick up Baltimore from here, and we're about maybe 200 miles. But sometimes I just would like to pick it up better, and I also have a devilish time with TV interference. I don't know if there's anything that can help that. I understand that, but I mean, I'm a realist. But I'm a baseball fan, and I'm an AM listener. Of course, if you listen to Coast AM, you almost have to be.
Someday those old TVs will die. All of the old ones that make the noise will die and go away. And we'll have a new breed of noise. Now, of course, we have the newer plasma televisions, and they do create electronic noise. Warning to fellow ham radio operators, they actually emanate noise. When I bought my plasma, I actually took a little radio down. The guy in the store thought I was out of my mind. And I put it on the shortwave bands and backed away from each one of the televisions until I found a particular model that did not radiate like a bandit. And that's the one I went for. Buster the Rockies, you're on the air. Hi.
Hi, I'm Charles on Kauai. I have invented an energy source that absorbs random thermal radio noise.
You've invented a device that absorbs random thermal radio noise?
Yes, this is a diode array works, and it aggregates the noise of many diodes which are aligned the same way.
I've heard of this. That's right.
It's been me.
Yeah, right. A diode array, which virtually is collecting free energy. And you, sir, are offering to send me some kind of little toy or something that will demonstrate this?
Yes, I was thinking about the easiest thing I could do with it.
But listen, man, you've been talking about this for years, and, I've been begging for the toy for years, just any little demo, and you're still talking, but I don't have the toy yet.
Okay, I'll try to make an electromagnet. That's easy for the prototyping. I mean, I by myself, and somebody gave me a quote of, I can't really say it over the radio, but 5 figures to make a prototype with the nanotechnology network. So,
all right. Well,
I'll try.
Yeah, all right. Well, he's been calling me for years now. Years. And it's not that I doubt, but I do want to see some kind of proof. Some little something, even a toy, that is demonstrating over unity in some manner. So, quit calling the show. Send me a toy. Then I'll have you as a guest. You're on the air, Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell. Hello.
Hey, Mr. Bill, how you doing? My name's Dave, calling from Columbus, Ohio.
Yes, sir.
Just wanted to tell you a little story about a haunted house a buddy of mine, Doug, grew up in. They lived there about 17 years, and all the family members and in-laws and everything swore they saw all kinds of things. I had a little strange incident happen to myself. Anyway, they moved out, and they've been out for a few years now. And I wasn't aware of EVPs and stuff like that back at the time that they lived there. I was curious, if I was to go to the doorstep of this house and ask them, if I could come in and do readings or whatnot, if they got wise to the fact that I knew the family who lived there before, would would that infringe on the contract somehow?
I really can't answer that. If you inform them that they live in a haunted house, that's what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that.
No.
No, I don't think I'd do that.
All right, I'm just curious, out of the blue there. Thought I'd ask
Actually, believe it or not, there are legal tangles that develop, and if you actually live in a haunted house, I believe that it is incumbent upon you in many places to inform the potential buyers that you live in a haunted house. So, I think the better policy would be don't tell. And if you do, I mean, just think of what it's going to put the people through. First-time caller line, you're on the air. Hello.
Yeah, hi, Art. How you doing?
Quite well, sir.
I just can't believe it. As I prayed before I got on, and I said, Lord, if I'm supposed to be on, let me get through. And I've never called before. And this is my first time calling.
Well, the Lord has done well by you. Here you are.
I guess so. Anyways, I just had something to say about Prophet Yahweh.
Ah, yes, Prophet Yahweh.
Yeah, what I had to say is, actually, there's a scripture that talks about how the false prophet will call fire down from heaven, and he'll deceive many. And so they're actually
he actually said
Yahweh.
in the interview, he said a lot of people wanted him dead.
Well, it's not that I would want him dead, because that's none of my business. It's just that I wouldn't trust what he says.
Well, I don't know about what he says, but when he's able to stand there, call the TV crews in, and produce a UFO, it's impressive.
Yeah,
to me,
impressive.
I'm impressed. I'm definitely impressed.
That's the whole idea. It's impressive, though. But if you also think about how Elijah was taken away in a chariot of fire, and now he's calling fire down from heaven, the same thing. There's a dark side and a light side. So actually what I'm saying could be blasphemy if it's not true. So I'm taking a chance just by saying it.
Well, you are. Your immortal soul is in.
Yeah, I hope. No, I don't mean that. I don't mean that. Everybody could be forgiven for what they do wrong.
Let's just watch this and see how it plays out. It is, based on what he's done so far, very interesting. So we'll see how it plays out. And the next week in my particular area of the world, the southwestern desert, should be a very, very interesting week. Wildcard line, you're on the air. Hi.
Good evening, Art.
Good evening,
E.D. from Las Vegas, man. On a lighter note on this prophet guy here in our hometown, man, it's like, let's look at it this way. Like, let's say the Zeta Reticulans, they travel in an immense galactic area to come not to Disneyland but to Las Vegas. You know, we got the rooms.
Well, remember, sir, what comes here stays here, right? What happens here stays here.
What happens here stays here to an extent. I mean, just think about that. A spaceport in Las Vegas?
Yeah.
Workers at Sherry's Ranch? You know, that could be insane.
Why not? Why not? This is such an unusual place we live in out here. It's unlike any other. It really is. Nevada itself is an unusual state, a wondrous and unusual state that doesn't follow along very much behind its neighbor. East of the Rockies, you're on the air. Hi.
Hi, Art. This is Larry in Florida.
Yes, Larry.
Hey, I've got an idea about why the American media has not picked up on the Russian UFO deal yet.
Do tell.
Because they're afraid if they do pick up on the Russian UFO deal, it's going to force the American government to release all the information they have on UFOs, and they don't want to release it.
Well, you've got a good point. In other words, there would be a comparison made. Gee, the free, open Brazilians or Russians and the tight-lipped Americans.
Yep.
All right, it's a good point.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. That could be it. Some sort of directive from the top. You know, the guys with the rings and the handshakes, all right? I wouldn't know anything about that. West of the Rockies, you're on the air. Hello.
Hi, Art. This is Bill from Mesa, Arizona.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to give you a call. I actually spoke to you back in '94 about a UFO I saw in Las Vegas. But the reason why I'm calling tonight was the collective consciousness that you have been discussing a lot lately.
Oh, yes.
And how people or the Mayan calendar ends in the year 2012. Or could it be that we all are going to collectively consciously make this the end of the world happen?
Make it actually happen. I've always thought, maybe the Mayans got sick of making calendars. Who knows why they stopped in 2012, and we're making perhaps more of it than we should, but your point is a good one. And that is that it may be that collective consciousness actually precipitates events to occur that otherwise would not occur, and we could bring about the end of the world ourselves.
I think that's what's going to happen.
The monster from the id, right? That's what it is. The monster from the id inside. I appreciate the call. Thank you. First-time caller line. We're short on time, but you're on the air.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey, pleasure to talk to you.
Andy,
hey,
where are you, and what is your first name?
I'm in truck driver somewhere in South Carolina on I-20 eastbound. My name's Terry.
Good enough for me. Okay, Terry.
All right. Hey, I saw one of your black triangles about 6 months ago. Yes, it was, I wasn't as close as you were, but I would guesstimate it was probably a couple of miles in front of me. Moving across the horizon, it was about, from my viewpoint, about treetop level, and it was huge. I'm talking about like aircraft carrier size.
Yes.
Just slowly, just moving across the sky freaked me out.
Well, Colin Kelleher reported quite extensively on this phenomena, and you know what? They haunt the interstates.
Huh.
These black triangles actually haunt the interstates. And if it really was U.S. experimental military stuff that they didn't want seen, the last damn place they'd fly them would be over the interstates of this country to be seen by everybody. And, you know, so that none of this makes any sense at all. I give it a 50-50 probability that it's U.S. experimental secret aircraft. But
I was near Shaw Air Force Base.
Well, you're sort of always near a base of one kind or another, relatively. Why would they fly down interstates? Now, that doesn't make any sense at all.
I have no idea. It freaked me out. I called the local airport in the area, and they said they didn't see anything on their radar.
Not a thing.
Nope.
Yeah, I know. I was insulted even more than that after we saw, my wife and I saw that triangle we saw. There was a story, the local paper consulted Nellis Air Force Base, and they said, why, yes, there was a secret mission that may have overflown the Pahrump Valley that night, and it was a C-130 aircraft.
Oh.
What an insult. I flew in C-130s. Man, they'd rattle your teeth. This was no C-130. It didn't even have engines. All right, buddy, thank you very much.
Thank you, Art. Appreciate it.
You have a good night. Drive safely out there. From the high desert in the middle of the darkness, in the next hour, we're going to explore what the Russians have had to say since the wall came down. I'm Art Bell.
Take a ride? To talk with Art Bell, call the wildcard line at area code 775-727-1295. The first-time caller line is area code 775-727-1222. To talk with Art Bell from east of the Rockies, call toll-free 800-825-5033. From west of the Rockies, call 800-618-8255. International callers may reach Art by calling your in-country Sprint access number, pressing option 5, and dialing toll-free 800-893-0903. From coast to coast and worldwide on the Internet, this is Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell.
It is indeed. I'll tell you what I've done. I've sent the Channel 13 link with the Yahweh video to Lex, the coasttocoastam.com webmaster. Lex, if you're listening, if you would please prominently post that so people can go take a look for themselves. I admit, it's absolutely incredible. All right, on the same subject of UFOs, coming up, Paul Stonehill. Paul Stonehill is accented because he was born in Kiev, the USSR, in 1959 and immigrated here to the U.S. in 1972. In his youth, Paul helped smuggle people out from behind the Iron Curtain, aided dissidents, smuggled banned literature into the USSR, graduated from California State University with a BA in political science, and wrote a thesis on the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. He's lucky to be here alive at all tonight. And also about UFO and anomalous phenomena. In October of 1993, Omni magazine featured a story about Paul's work and the research center that he had created back in 91, the Russian Ufology Research Center. After the fall of communism, his articles were published throughout Russia and the Ukraine. Since 1989, Paul has consulted for American television and motion picture production companies as well as corporate entities. His areas of expertise are Russian history, Soviet covert operations, corporate security issues for expatriate workers, warfare in the former USSR, cross-cultural training, anomalous phenomena in Eastern Europe, Russia, Central Asia, and China. He has published writing in the following areas: Soviet and Russian military research, paranormal phenomena, KGB and paranormal phenomena, underwater unidentified phenomena, mysteries of Soviet space programs, mysteries of ancient history, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, Mongol Empire, Siberia, time travel experiments in Russia. Wow, ghost trains of Eurasia, mysteries of ancient China, Soviet mind control programs, ESP and famous psychics, UFO phenomena in Russia, Ukraine, the Baltics, and China. Anomalous zones in Eurasia, Russian cryptozoology, lost creatures of Eurasia, ghost trains of Eurasia. A new book to be called Paranormal Eurasia is seeking a publisher now. In a moment. Boy, that's a lot of area to cover. In a moment, Paul Stonehill. As promised, here is Paul Stonehill. Paul, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
It's really good to have you. I mean, you have so much that people in this audience haven't heard before. I think the first question I want to ask you is the Russian people have always been fascinated with, to a much greater extent, the paranormal phenomena that goes on in this world around us, much more than we have. And why the particular fascination by the Russian people?
First of all, the country itself was and is a huge piece of land. And you have reports coming from all over. And sometimes published, sometimes not, but people could exchange information. And whether it's the sands of the Gobi Desert and the huge worms that exist there, or the Arctic territories, or Siberia with strange animals sometimes, and reports of gigantic UFOs over the tundra. Reports like that came from all over. And some people actually, thank God, put them down on paper through the ages. And once somebody like me starts putting it all together, you see astonishing patterns coming about, and correlation between reports that go back 1,000 years and something that happened under the Soviet eyes or the Tsarist secret police. Russian people themselves are just like anybody else, but they're maybe more inclined to read, to study culture. They have a belief that they have a special soul. Nothing racist, but they have special feelings about themselves, and maybe they're not as practical as some other nations. I think Ukrainians, where I'm from, are much more practical. And all this gives an impetus to study Russian paranormal phenomena, among it UFO phenomenon, for example.
There is a big fascination with it, though, among the Russian people. Anyway, why did the KGB send expeditions to the forbidden Kola Peninsula? Why was it forbidden?
It's forbidden because it has officially a lot of good resources that very few other parts of Russia would have, but also it has ancient artifacts that age back, I would say, to the times of Stonehenge or before that. It contains ancient labyrinths, mazes that are as secretive, as mysterious as those ones on the Crete Island and elsewhere, and they look identical. Now, such mazes are called Babylons. Who named them that? Nobody knows. But besides that, the peninsula itself may hide the ancient northern Atlantis, something that Nazis were very much interested too, and were trying to get to the peninsula. But even before Nazi Germany became what it was, in 1920s, the KGB sent special expeditions to study an interesting so-called psychic phenomena of the natives, and at the same time to gather information about the strange areas around Lake St. Ozero, very, very enigmatic place. We don't know everything, but we do know that the expeditions went out.
And what were they specifically looking for?
They were looking for, I would say, traces of whatever civilization existed there thousands of years ago.
And they sent the KGB to do this, huh?
Well, but you see, the situation was that one of the heads of the KGB, it was called different at the time, but we will call it that, Gleb Boki, was himself very much interested in the paranormal and created a special laboratory under the guidance of the KGB, and he had psychics, he had people who had researched Shambhala. Borchenko was one of his top specialists, a very interesting person, a doctor, a scientist, and they worked hand in hand. But you see, they also belonged to a secret organization that wanted to promote paranormal brotherhood under socialist guise, but not a Soviet group. And in 1937, they were killed by Stalin.
Can I recently, in fact, over the years, Paul, I have read some really, truly incredible stories in Pravda. Is Pravda dependable from that point of view? I mean, it printed a story, you may have seen it, about an amazing sort of a mist in which a time travel seemed to occur, and a lot of stories like this come from Pravda. And I'm just sort of asking you if Pravda is generally dependable, or is it full of a lot of BS?
There is some BS, but Pravda today is not what Pravda used to be under the communists. I think it went bankrupt in 1991, and some private group purchased it. Basically what they do is they figured out that there is a lot of interest in Russian paranormal. And, people see what I do, they become interested, and they, to be modest, I'm not the only one, but I think here I'm an expert. And they put together stories and they publish them because it sells, it helps to sell the newspaper. Sometimes they're not very accurate, but I think they're trying to do a good job.
Well, there have certainly been some strange stories over the years. Perhaps, for example, the story about the very deepest hole ever drilled in Siberia, that could be real or a hoax. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't think so. I don't think so about that. God knows there are enough paranormal stories about the strange lands of Russia and things that have happened there for thousands of years. So, but do keep an eye on Pravda. I think they published a very interesting story about a Caspian Sea amphibian creature, which is very interesting to me because I have quite a lot about strange amphibious beings, that were registered by Soviet military. And so I like to correlate. You do get to pick up some interesting things from Pravda. They use some of the sources I do, my good friends, people like Nikolai Subbotin or Vadim Chernobov in Russia. So, they do go after some good sources.
You have, of course, a number of ongoing contacts then in Russia still.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I do. It's not as easy today to get information as it was when the Soviet Union was falling apart.
Oh, really?
Absolutely. Russia is a state in search of itself, and the way the search goes, it's becoming more secretive. It wants to exert power. It feels vulnerable. And I'm not defending them. First of all, Ukraine being an independent state is something that I would... I don't want to say feel allegiance to, but I know politics of Ukraine, let's say, better than Russian. I don't want to stick my nose in something that doesn't interest me. But Russia today is feeling vulnerable. They're afraid of the NATO expansion. That's what they see.
Well, I can't say that I blame them. They went from an empire to sort of an isolated position. How is Russia now, and I suppose Ukraine as well, doing economically? Are they on the first steps getting back on their feet?
Russia has gone back to its feet because of oil. Oil has helped a lot. Now, the situation is how is the money distributed. I think Putin is trying to do the best he can. Russia could have a much worse leader than Vladimir Putin. And, at the same time, I really hate what he was trying to do in Ukraine not long ago. And, I was never hiding my views. But at the same time, I must say that this person is putting Russia together as a strong and powerful state. They have a lot of threats, or what they perceive as threats, and they have to pull together. At the same time, it reflects, the new pride in national spirit, and the army, which is not such a good army, still.
Not such a good army
not
still,
such
huh?
a good one. They can't do much. They're very corrupt. They have the old Soviet, army bosses that still run the army, and it's neglected. Young recruits are treated badly. They can't win a small war in Chechnya. And, they're having some strides, but I wouldn't say that it's one of what it should be.
Mm-hmm. What about this lake that we've been reading about? What can you tell me about it?
Oh, there are so many interesting lakes. Well, there is a Lake Ladoga in the area not far from St. Petersburg. That's a very interesting situation. For hundreds of years, reports came from that lake. Objects would come out and go back into the lake. Discs, gigantic cigar-like shapes. There are some strange things that happen at the very bottom of the lake that have been recorded. Now, in the modern times, we know that the Soviets and the Russians today have been conducting military experiments in the area. But researchers in that area, when they start correlating information, they can't understand what's going on. It definitely is not a military-related pattern of incidents. And there is nothing they can do, the military themselves do.
So you think the military, along with everybody else, is just monitoring it and trying to figure out what's going on?
Nowadays, they may not even have enough money to monitor it, but they do know it's not theirs. Before, under the Soviet times, they had an excellent research, and I always try to bring it up. And in my book, I cover it quite a lot. The book I talk about, I should mention it, is something that I and Philip Mantle put together. It's called UFO USSR, and it's available now. And I'm very proud of the effort. We went after as many Soviet programs, research secret programs as possible, and we put down names, dates, incidents, and the more somebody reads about it, the more fascinating you become. How the Soviets paid attention to the UFO phenomenon. They wanted to know what's flying over their missiles, over their nuclear silos, over the nuclear power stations, and you also find out how the United States intelligence community wanted to find out also.
Of course they did. Paul, we had an incident, a very large incident, in which disks appeared over and disabled some of our ICBM sites in this country. Mm-hmm. There was a similar story, which I saw, and I'll never forget, about Russia, in which disks hovered above Russian ICBM sites and actually initiated launch sequences. Is that a true story?
The story is true. 1982 Ukraine. And I basically, come down to it. A nuclear war, could have been able to. A nuclear war could have started any moment, and that's one of the more sinister cases. But by no means the only case of an interruption.
I'm sure that's not all. But I want to be straight on what actually did happen. The story I got was that these ICBMs actually went into launch sequence. The countdown began. They couldn't stop it. They ended up ripping out consoles and checking everything out and never did find anything wrong. I mean, is that basically
never did find anything wrong? You're right. And that's what happened. And they, few people, got gray hair because of that. But the situation is that years later, for some reason, they're trying to change the story. Some of those involved, not all, but some. So, yes, in 1982, you almost had a nuclear war that was triggered because the launch codes for the ICBMs have been enabled, and nobody knows how, And it was a gigantic UFO. I don't think it was more than one. It was over an ICBM base in Ukraine. And somebody named Boris Sokolov, who was part of the secret military research program, who told that story years ago, today is trying to change it. And he may be under pressure. I don't want to discuss why. What I do want to say is that people like Mr. Plaksin, who was a liaison between the civilian and the military branches of the program, he comes out and says, oh no, what happened did happen before. And there is a lot more to talk about. And this guy, he's a colonel. He's the leading paranormal phenomena expert of the Russian Defense Ministry. So you can see that, nothing is clear. Nothing ever is in the Russian UFO or paranormal research. You have the state secrets mixed together. You have, different interests. But one picture comes out, no matter what anybody says or deny. Strange objects have been sighted over Russia for thousands of years. I mean it. Under the Soviet times, they have buzzed over most secret Soviet installations. Stalin wanted to know what they were. Khrushchev wanted to know. People after them. But they did know enough not to attack them too often.
All right, hold it right there. Paul Stonehill is going to tell us the Russian secrets. They're out now. Most of them are out now. I'm Art Bell.
Podcasting. Get it today at coasttocoastam.com.
Some velvet morning when I'm straight, I'm gonna open up your gate and maybe tell you about Phaedra and how she gave me life and how she made some velvet morning when I'm straight.
Flowers growing on a hill, dragonflies and daffodils learn from us very much. Look at us, but do not touch. Phaedra is my name.
To talk with Art Bell, call the Wildcard line at area code 775-727-1295. The first-time caller line is area code 775-727-1222. To talk with Art Bell from east of the Rockies, call toll-free at 800-825-5033. From west of the Rockies, call Art at 800-618-8255. International callers may reach Art Bell by calling your in-country Sprint access number, pressing option 5, and dialing toll-free 800-893-0903. From coast to coast and worldwide on the Internet, this is Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell.
You've really got to wonder what they were doing when they did what they did. I refer now to the objects that hovered over U.S. silos, disabling quite a large number of ICBMs, literally taking them out of service. They ripped everything up, never could find a cause for it. But then imagine an officer in the Soviet rocket service down in his silo watching the code being entered and watching the launch sequence to the end of the world begin as the saucers hovered right above your facility, watching the beginning of the end of the world. That must have been some experience. I wonder if the message was simply, we are in control of what happens. We can cause war, or we can stop retaliation. I don't know, but I'll bet you at the highest levels, both here in America and in the Soviet Union at that time, a lot of wondering about all that went on. Huh, Paul?
I am sure, and like I said, this was not the only time. The message has been sent many times in the Soviet Union, as an example. Gigantic objects appeared over Soviet nuclear submarines. Soviet nuclear submarines were chased by huge, super fast objects under the water. You also have...
under the water. Now, that's the first time I think I've heard about that.
Quite a lot. We have a huge chapter in that book, UFO USSR, dedicated to the underwater phenomena. because we've been able to collect so much from interesting sources. The bottom line is, through this history of the Soviet Navy, you had objects that approached Soviet submarines, the so-called croakers, who would emit strange sounds but never harm the submarine.
Croakers, you called them croakers.
Croakers, because they emitted sounds like croaking of, like a frog would do, similar. And the Soviet submariners were able to record such, and they were so apprehensive about it that they had created a special program to study it. They wanted to know what danger such objects would, make for Soviet submarines. But that was not the only incident.
Paul, they're sure these croakers were not biologicals of some sort.
If so, then we have many life forms on this planet that we know nothing about.
That's true.
And I think the more I study Soviet and Russian UFO phenomena, the more I'm convinced we know very little about our own planet. And there are life forms next to us that study us and want to see if we present any danger. And I think humans do present quite a lot of danger with ecology and so forth, because you can see UFO incidents reported over Soviet areas where contamination has occurred, or Chernobyl, or the Urals, where Soviets conducted secret tests and experiments.
There's a very strange story going around right now about the children in the area of influence at Chernobyl, that they have somehow higher IQs. Is that a ridiculous story?
I think so. I think what they have is a higher incidence of cancer.
That's what I had heard, yes.
Unfortunately, I've just spoken to somebody a few days ago from Belarus. This was the area most affected by Chernobyl's tragedy. And it's horrible what's going on there. But, people come back. People have nothing to live on, so they go back to the villages around the area, and they settle there. And, they take the consequences. What else can you do? There are so many poor people. The economies do not work for the most part. If we go back, any subject we touch, there's always some secrecy involved.
Since we're touching Chernobyl for a second, Paul, do you know what the true state of Chernobyl now is? I've heard these, 60 Minutes here did a big report on the crumbling structure, the sarcophagus over Chernobyl, that it's just disintegrating.
It is, and it's in a very dangerous state, but I also know that the United States government, now that Ukraine has changed a lot, U.S. government is going to give them a hand, and it's a good thing.
Yeah.
But you should also know that Chernobyl, long ago this incident, there were reports of malfunctions, and the Ukrainian current, KGB, what it is today, they've published some reports about it. We have some in our book. It's horrible. They knew what was going to happen, and they did nothing.
They knew what was going to happen?
Well, let's put it down this way. They knew a malfunction can cause a very bad incident. And nobody got burned for that, except people who received radiation. You haven't seen any court cases in the former Soviet Union?
No.
No, I haven't seen anything like Nuremberg process in Germany.
No, nothing like that. So many things of this magnitude seem to end up that way, like it's nobody's fault.
But they really messed up the ecology of the Soviet Union anywhere. And they did secret underground nuclear tests, and they've experimented on people and others, through the Soviet history, sometimes more, sometimes less. But no matter what they did, they had UFOs registered over their most secret test sites and, like I said, nuclear power stations.
Well, Paul, the whole UFO thing seems to have gone up and out of control after we exploded the first atomic bomb. Look where the sightings were, and look how close all of that was together. It seemed to begin then, and isn't it reasonable to assume, Paul, that another intelligent race would take very careful note of the first use of an atomic bomb and then monitor very closely after that?
Absolutely. But I also must go back to in history into 1908 to Tunguska over Siberia when something strange exploded or imploded.
I was talking about that in the first hour. Something is wrong with that whole story of Tunguska. Something's wrong. I mean, you have this giant explosion that, it's my understanding, of flattened trees in a 40-mile circle, roughly.
Thousands of kilometers.
Thousands of kilometers. And there was no impact point for anything.
No, but quite a lot of consequences for the Earth, from the disturbances in the magnetic fields to strange weather throughout the Earth to a high birth of geniuses.
Yes, I really want to talk about this a little bit. Let's back up a little bit. You said magnetic disturbances. This created magnetic disturbances that were recorded or known in, how is that known?
Well, Siberian institutes and other entities throughout the world had recorded strange readings of the disturbances in the magnetic field of the planet, and they've jotted down, and people who had studied the area, who had studied it, whether with an intent or not, were amazed, scientists, of what's going on. It's something strange. It's an object that, like we said, flattens 2,100 square kilometers of force, leaves no craters, no obvious fragments. Nobody knows what it was, but I know that it has caused subsequent mutations, and there was an ecological impact. There has been so much, and we still do not know what it is.
Magnetic disturbances, mutations, all of that sounds like radiation, doesn't it?
Some of it, but it was more than radiation. It was obviously more. I just wanted to let you know that one of the most interesting consequences was that in 1908 in Russia, a number of geniuses was born much better, and not only in Russia, much larger than subsequently or previously when it was recorded. Somebody did a study like that. You had tens of millions of people around the globe who saw what the aftermath was. The night itself has disappeared to the west of the explosion, to western Siberia and Europe. There was a darkness for 72 hours. You never had it before. You had a few nights over northern Europe.
You had darkness for 72 hours.
There were several nights over northern Europe when the sky glowed enough to light the streets of London. The Irkutsk Observatory, that's in Siberia, they had reported disturbances in the Earth's magnetic fields 900 kilometers southeast of the epicenter. That, it was the local, in that area, geomagnetic disturbance was similar to some effects that follow middle and high altitude nuclear explosions in the atmosphere. But there was some kind of delay. It occurred after the explosion, such disturbances. The book, let me do this. I need to tell you something. In the book, we have a lot of data. I won't be able to tell you 1/5 of what we have. I do want to keep me as long as you want. But if you don't mind, let me tell people where they can read more about it.
Go right ahead.
If you, at least, the book is available now. And to get it, you need to call 888-953-2665.
Hold it. Hold it. What was the first part? 800?
888.
888. Okay, the number is 888-953-2665, right?
Absolutely.
And the book that you want to get is the Soviet UFO Files.
No, UFO USSR. That was my first book.
They should have put that down here. UFO USSR?
Yes. Thank you. And now, I'll let people know maybe later again, but now you can ask me whatever you want, because I want to let you know that there is so much information. Military reports, intelligence reports, Soviet space, Soviet cosmonauts reports about UFOs.
But based on what little I know of Tunguska, it's so interesting. None of it adds up to a meteorite, which would normally be nickel and iron and some other things, and it certainly wouldn't produce. It would not produce magnetic disturbances. I would not think normally. It certainly would not produce radiation like mutations of humans and plants and animals? Something else happened over Tunguska, not a meteorite.
We give hypotheses. We present all hypotheses. One of them was given by a Russian scientist who unfortunately was murdered in 1995. And he states, and we give his reasons, 2 objects actually collided over the Tunguska. And those huge objects were extraterrestrial spaceships, nuclear-powered spaceships. And the explosion was such as to cause the consequences. But there is also something else you need to know. 1908, June 30th, when it happened, was the day when it would take the shortest time to get to Earth if a spaceship started from Mars or Venus to get to Earth.
Okay, now that's a pretty big stretch, Paul. When you say that you know that 2 extraterrestrial craft exploded over Tunguska or collided over Tunguska, I mean, how do you know that?
I don't know. No, I don't say I know, but we put down reports, scientific studies, and measurements of the objects that were flying from different directions. Who said it? When? I mean, we want to be very detailed because this is the most interesting UFO incident in the whole Russian history of the paranormal phenomena.
Was it supposedly a complete annihilation of both objects? Was there subsequently anything ever found?
Some people claim that there have been finds. There is a Russian scientist that claims that last year he was at the site, he found something, he wants to come out with the report. We mentioned his name too on what he has. I don't like to speculate, I like to see things. That's why, and I was very much interested, Art, to find out that Joseph Stalin sent special expedition to the site in 1949. We don't know what he collected, but he was very much interested. This guy was no nonsense. He knew what he wanted.
Stalin? Oh, yes. Well, have any of these files been made public?
Some research documents are public. Stalin's files, I don't think we'll ever see them.
Oh.
It's a state secret. But things leak out. You can't have complete secrecy in such a nation. Too many people knew things, and they come out. And that's how we were able to find out about strange expeditions to the site, just a few times after it happened.
Well, I do believe that people who study Tunguska will come up with a gigantic question mark about the so-called, mainstream story. It just doesn't add up. None of it adds up.
None of it does.
And you've really documented the fact that a very large number of geniuses were born in that area following that explosion.
There is more. And we get into the area of the intelligence, of foreign intelligence interest in the area, you will read about the MI5 and one scandalous story. We'll also get somehow to the SDI research and scientists who had disappeared in England, a number of scientists who had studied UFOs. Now, the British were, SDI research, not UFOs. The British were very much interested in what was going on in Tunguska and in the so-called comet weapons. True or not, I don't know, but I have to present information available to us. And it all ties in, and at the same time, it still is one of the biggest mysteries there can be.
So anyway, your conclusion is that two actual ships collided, producing some sort of radioactive explosion.
Not my conclusion. Conclusion of one of the top Russian scientists.
Do you agree with that conclusion?
My opinion, yes, based on, I believe it's credible based on the information available, but there is also enough information to think that it might have been a launch of an object from the sky over Siberia to the outer space. And that information is also presented in the book. We also have information about a possibility that 3 ball lightnings got together. Now, I don't believe in it, but I have to put it down. And we try to use scientific explanations, meaning from scientists. However, scientists are not all of the same mind. We also like military reports because military people were usually no-nonsense. They wanted to find out if an object presented a threat to the security of their nation.
Right. In America, we had so-called Project Blue Book, whose conclusion, by the way, was that whatever these things were or are, they are not a threat to national security and to our nation. And every time I hear that, I laugh. I mean, how could something that flies at speeds we can't duplicate in our own skies not be a threat?
But then maybe we laugh, but maybe we don't know enough, you and I, because I got to tell you, Stalin basically wanted to know the same. And he got one of the best Soviet scientists, like Sergei Korolev and Keldysh, to study materials Stalin's agents obtained from the United States about Roosevelt, about a few other incidents. We don't know what. I wish I had glanced at that pile of documents that Korolev had in his disposal, and he had to give the answer to the dictator in a few days. And he did. Based on his knowledge and research, Sergei Korolev, one of the fathers of the Soviet space science, came to a conclusion that, yes, UFOs exist. Yes, they fly over us quite frequently. No, they don't pose an immediate danger to the Soviet armed forces.
Huh.
But this is only a tip of the iceberg. Because I know Stalin, based on my research, that Stalin studied this situation quite.
And you know he told Stalin this. How, since those files are sealed?
How he told Stalin?
I mean, how do you know he told Stalin this if Stalin's
one
files?
One of my best sources is a Russian professor mentioned throughout the book, a very knowledgeable person, one of the top missile engineers, and he basically says that he was given this information, he was told this information by people who work with Korolev, because this man was also with Professor Burdakov. I'll give you his name.
All right, hold it right there. We're at the top of the hour. We'll pick this up and so much more, like what Soviet cosmonauts have reported. Our astronauts are pretty tight-lipped, but some of the cosmonauts have had quite a bit to say about whispers in outer space.
Talk with Art Bell. Call the Wildcard line at area code 775-727-1295. The first-time caller line is area code 775-727-1222. To talk with Art Bell from east of the Rockies, call toll-free at 800-825-5033. From west of the Rockies, call 800-618-8255. International callers may reach Art by calling your in-country Sprint access number, pressing option 5, and dialing toll-free 800-893-0903. From coast to coast and worldwide on the Internet, this is Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell.
Well, perhaps man with a slow four-fingered hand, huh? Good morning. We're talking UFOs with Paul Stonehill. Paul is from Ukraine, and he's smuggled lots and lots of secrets out of what used to be the USSR, and we're going to explore them this morning. Astronauts. I had the privilege, of course, of interviewing Ed Mitchell who walked on the moon. And interviewing a man who would walk on the moon would be, you would think, a very interesting prospect. And it was, in the sense that I got down to asking him, well, you know, when you were walking on the moon, when you were actually on the moon, what were you thinking? What were you seeing? What were you absorbing? And he gave the strangest answer. I mean, surely you would think that what you had done, going to the moon, would be indelibly imprinted in your mind. But it wasn't. In a lot of ways, he said, I have a hard time remembering a lot of what happened. I thought that's such a strange answer. You would think every footstep, every grain of memory from an experience like that would be indelibly imprinted. Many of our other astronauts act as though they're hiding something, in the sense that they've had very difficult lives. Some with alcohol abuse, marriages that haven't worked out, a very difficult time with U.S. astronauts. And I'm not saying that it is that they are hiding some gigantic secret, but that's one possibility. And they make tantalizing remarks. Well, anyway, let's find out. If we look at the Russian side of things, and they've had as many people in space for longer periods of time than we have, and the cosmonauts report some kind of strange whispering or something, don't they?
Absolutely. Besides UFOs, so strange objects in space, some of them come out with that. They also talk about strange whisper. And when you mentioned the astronaut you spoke to, kind of gives you an idea that somebody is messing up with their minds. And here is the story about whispers. More than one Soviet cosmonaut talked about it. Not all of them like to discuss it. It's one of the more secret phenomena that affects them. But basically, it's as if something, according to a cosmonaut, if something was standing next to them, let's say they're aboard an orbital space station,
yes,
all of a sudden they feel somebody is standing next to them. There is a feeling that there was somebody invisible is staring them in the back. And ideas come to their heads. And later, when some of them were not afraid to talk to each other, they found out that things were being whispered to them inside their consciences. Something like, you arrived here too early. You did it in the wrong fashion. Trust me, I am your ancestor on your maternal side.
Really?
And they give information about the past. Of course, you know, Soviet cosmonauts are, for the most part, used to be atheists and very hard-nosed people, no-nonsense people, and then they want to find out what happened. You know, and they exchange information, and basically they came to a conclusion that an alien intelligence, using some kind of hypnosis, is determined to prevent the mankind from exploring the outer space, and to convince the humankind that its sons and daughters in the outer space are not experiencing hallucinations. Hard facts about their past are presented, facts that they pick up from probing human brains, memories, and subconscious.
That's quite an allegation. However, you know, Paul, we went to the moon. We walked on the moon. I maintain we did do it. There are some who say we didn't. I'm not one of them. I think we did. But it's as though after that, we, for some reason, decided that's it. We'll put up communication satellites. We'll put up perhaps a space station orbiting our own planet, but that's it, baby. We're not doing anything else. And it's almost like something stopped us.
And you know, Art, but we keep on coming to Mars. And we have a chapter in the book of the Phobos missions.
Yes.
When they failed back in '89, at least one of them, after a huge object was photographed, and a Soviet spacecraft was basically knocked out from our orbit. And
I saw the photographs of that object, Paul. There is no question some gigantic object simply collided with this Russian spacecraft and kaboom, destroyed it. Isn't that right?
That's it, except the Russian object. And we'll talk about it. It shouldn't be called Russian. It's more American and Western than Russian, but we'll talk about this cooperation. Anyway, the object came back about a week later. It sent signals, and then it disappeared forever. And the moonlet Phobos, the one that it was...
What do you mean it sent signals?
It actually sent signals back to the Earth control. It came back alive, but nobody knows from where. And it's gone. After that, nobody heard about it at all. I have the Soviet reports, newspaper reports, and others. And I gotta tell you, they were very confused, and ideas were flying around, and people, Soviet scientists and top space people, talked about aliens. Some, in irony, some not. Like
all right, Paul.
Burdakov, because they could not explain why such a well-prepared mission would disappear in a very strange place next to moonlet Phobos that some people believe is of artificial character.
You're telling me so much here, Paul. I mean, first of all, that this object transmitted after it was supposedly destroyed. Now, is there hard evidence of that? Do they have the records?
All the records that are available are listed in the book. But to tell you more than that, because we have to go detail by detail, I give names, dates, reports, and quotes, because it's a very interesting subject. There is more to that. The Phobos 2 carried a special laser aboard its, among its equipment. They wanted to test soil on Mars and Phobos. And one of the top Russian scientists said, you know what? If there are beings, sentient beings who live on on the planet, maybe they don't want us to test our laser weapons on them.
Maybe not.
Mars lander carried a more refined version of the laser weapon, and it disappeared also. And the laser was made by the same Russian institution. I got to tell you, there is a lot of cooperation between our space program and the Russian space program. And this convinced me when I studied this Phobos incident. JPL scientists, based on the Soviet reports, were in touch moment by moment. The spaceships themselves, the probes, were made in Western Europe, some of it in the Soviet Union, but it was a joint effort. By no means just the Soviet. And the more I study this phenomena, the more I see cooperation.
Cooperation. I have seen the photographs, and so I can understand why the Soviet technicians would be talking about alien intervention. How could they not, based on photographs like that? But there must be more to it. In other words, you're saying there were transmissions afterward? And was there some kind of contact made?
I think it was just registered. The object, the probe registered itself, that it came back to life, and that's it. Of course, there might have been more. We just don't know enough. I go by available information. I don't have any, secret contacts in the Soviet government or Russian government. I go by information that's available. We just know how to collect such information.
All right. Well, based on what information you do have, I really am very interested, and I bet the audience is too. Yes, I've seen these photographs. I saw the object. And how much do you know about what kind of talk went on in the Soviet Union about what had just happened to their probe? They believed absolutely that it was some sort of alien intervention. Certainly many people in this country.
No, not absolutely, but enough people of importance believed that an account has to be found of what happened. And even in the newspapers, they would say, it looks like aliens did it. Some were laughing, most people were not. And such important authority as Professor Burdakov came out and said, he knew nothing what was happening in the West, but he was worried enough to say, we sent a mission to Mars, and it was a mission to study and explore and take military tests. Whoever lives on Mars would not like it. And this guy is one of the smartest people there are. He says, why did we do it in such a stupid fashion? He questioned. His reports were published. His questions were published. There were others. There was so much confusion, and as you can see, the Soviet Union fell apart in a year or two. Nobody talks about it anymore, except for a few people like us.
Is there some reason for that a disintegration that goes beyond what we've all been told?
I don't think so. I think it's just politics and stupidity. But because of that, a lot of materials got lost. A lot of files. Some files came out, but also a lot of interesting files will never be found out. Somewhere, I have no doubts that some private interests in the West purchased them. I have no doubts that some of the most important governments, be it in the Orient or the West, got their hands on Soviet UFO files and paranormal files. And also...
That's an awfully good point. Believe me, I know some men who have unlimited amounts of money, Paul, and I would not be surprised that some of these men might be willing to spend their money on files like that. And you're saying there's no question for a period of time they were for sale?
I'm sure it is. It's not something that you will find on the Internet, but things like that find buyers. I know some of my contacts kept telling me that, people come to Russia and offer money not only from the West. For example, of the Dalnygorsk incident of 1986, where there was some traces of an object that disintegrated. We'll get into it. They buy, whatever was left behind, strange metallic balls and other things. There is a market for it. It exists. There are people who are interested. I remember once, in 1994, I published an article about Soviet psi weapon developments and, specialized weapons to control people's minds and so forth. I had offers. All of a sudden, people send me offers. If you have this apparatus, who want to buy it? I was laughing. If I had it, I would destroy it. I don't need this junk.
What do you know factually, Paul, about what the Soviets did? How far they got in mind control?
Quite a lot. They did quite a lot. I know they conducted experiments on soldiers from Afghanistan to change their minds about wanting to fight.
Really?
Yeah. It's Fate magazine has my article back in 1994.
Do you know the methods that were used?
Electromagnetic waves. I listed quite. I did good translation work. Believe me, it caused me a lot of headaches. But they do use a lot of electromagnetic waves and some other technologies. Crude. There was no accountability, but at the same time, they wanted to keep it secret. My fear is that some of it got into private hands again as Russia fell out. And there were reports later in Russia, post-communist Russia, that this politician or that politician was trying to use it. I think our people were also interested in the United States government. And I think
I'm sure we were interested. Anything that could control minds. Do you have any idea how successful these efforts were?
I think there were, to the point of special institute studying it in Kiev, in Moscow, and I think they had enough to create specialized, devices, equipment. Again, nobody knows the extent of...
But I'm asking how successful they were. In other words, were they able to control the human mind?
Not to the extent to prevent the disintegration of the Soviet Union. Otherwise, they would be able to.
That's a good point.
There were plans to put such equipment aboard Soviet orbital stations and to direct it at the populations below. But because there was confusion in 1980s and Gorbachev and Perestroika and everything, this has not worked out. But the people who wanted to do it have not gone away.
Okay, so you're telling me now, let me get this one straight, that they had developed it to the point where they were ready or had plans to put it on Soviet spacecraft aimed at the world's population. Yes?
Yes. This was one of the plans.
Oh, my God.
Yes, this was the plan. And I believe I mentioned it later on in one of my articles in UFO magazine. And this was published in Russian media and not tabloid media. I mean, we're talking about names and dates. And there is quite a lot of interest in this so-called torsionic weapons and mind control weapons. Again, nobody knows where things go, where files fly to, who buys what.
Do you have any idea, for example, if something like that had been put into orbit and the trigger had been pulled, Paul, what actually would have happened? and in what way people would have been controlled? Do you have any idea?
I guess whole populations would have a change of mind and would follow a special line. You know, you can instill anything into people's mind with the right propaganda, and here you would have directed weapon systems aimed. I think you could do anything you want with people.
Could it be really so specific that you could change people's political views, for example?
I think it's quite possible. It's beyond my doubts. Look at James Jones and what he did in 1708, and he had no weapons.
Huh. Well, that's frightening to just even contemplate. Something as massive as a space-based mind control weapon, that's incredible. I hadn't even ever considered it before. And you're telling me not only did they consider it, but they had plans to be doing it.
Yeah, and it's good that they were not able to. In my heart, I believe they were not able to, only because of confusion, and there wasn't anybody like Stalin who would put his fist down and say, "Do it," and they would do it. And because Gorbachev was no Stalin, of course, nothing, and people after him, Yeltsin was nothing. He might have had the secrets, but he was drinking too hard to,
Yes. Russia's been certainly through a very strange time recently, huh? Its recent political history is very, very strange. And when I visited Russia, and I did, Paul, I found that many people there actually yearned for the way it used to be. They yearned to have the iron fist once again. They actually missed it.
It's not even so much the hard hand. You have to understand, in the last 20 years, almost 20 years, everything has changed in the lives of the Soviets.
I know.
And, of course, some think that an iron hand, that if Stalin could be cloned, he would bring everything to order. But he would also bring concentration camps.
That's right.
And you can't escape it. Now people know. You could say, well, before we never knew. Look at Russia. Most people live in poverty. They've lost the empire, like you say. But they didn't call it an empire, but they've lost
the way of
life.
It was an empire. No, it was.
It was. No, I'm not saying it wasn't. That's not how the Soviet people viewed it. They were told they live in the best place in the world. Very few of them had a way to find out it's not so. Day after day, they put ideas in our brains that we live in the best place in the world. I was a kid in a Soviet school, and they say, eat bread. Eat your lunch, eat your bread, because people in America don't have enough to eat. It's not...
No, I know. They told these stories, and, of course, modern technology came along and slowly but surely made them liars, didn't it?
Absolutely. People started finding out it's not so. The things that happen in the world, maybe we live in the worst place, and they do not. It's like North Korea today, they believe the same thing. Maybe the Soviet Union was not to that extent, but people believed a lot of the things. And they could see that life was getting better after World War II, when Russia was basically destroyed.
All right, hold it right there, Paul. We're at a break point. Fascinating stuff. It really is. Paul Stonehill is my guest. I wonder if any of those spacecraft, perhaps just one step from being activated, well, gee, they might well still be in orbit if they really got there, huh? From the high deserts in the middle of the darkness, this is Coast to Coast AM.
Ain't got no
talk with Art Bell, call the wildcard line at area code 775-727-1295. The first-time caller line is area code 775-727-1222. To talk with Art Bell from east of the Rockies, call toll-free at 800-825-5033. From west of the Rockies, call Art at 800-618-8255. International callers may reach Art Bell by calling your in-country Sprint access number, pressing option 5, and dialing toll-free 800-893-0903. From coast to coast and worldwide on the Internet, this is Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell.
Kind of close your eyes for a moment and picture in the cold, dead quiet of space a Soviet-era spacecraft, still very much alive, still very much orbiting the globe, probably about every 90 minutes, with something on board that would create a magnetic pulse, if trained properly on the Earth's population, that would affect mind control of, well, perhaps an entire continent or something like that. And that switch, as yet, hasn't been thrown. Or, looking around these days, perhaps it has. I very, very much doubt to this very day we at all have a good understanding of the kinds of things that the Soviets might have had in orbit, and for that matter might still be in orbit. For example, Paul, there was a very large, regular news story about Russia promising a Southeast Asian country, which at that time was undergoing terrible fires. I mean, just thousands and thousands of miles of timber was burning. And I believe it was Russia that offered to create a cyclone with one of their satellites. They claimed they could create a cyclone and would do it free of charge the first time to put out the forest fires. And that ran in the world's press. Was that a true story?
I'll answer you this way. The Soviets had conducted a lot of experiments in the sky to create weather.
Yes.
Some of them, because of our research, we have found out stories about so-called clouds. The clouds have appeared throughout Soviet and Russian UFO history, and they're very interesting and sinister objects of different dimensions and formations. Even Soviet secret research to study UFOs, the so-called Setka research, they received reports about clouds. They couldn't do anything to understand what they are. And I don't think that you had a clash of two bureaucratic systems. A secret research there and here, just not knowing what happens. To answer your questions, they were doing experiments in the atmosphere, and some of them were mistaken for UFOs, and whatever consequences they caused were not good.
What kind of experiments do you know, Paul?
They were trying to seed clouds, so-called clouds, but as a subterfuge for that, we know that they were working on the so-called plasma weapons. Something along the lines of our SDI research, but maybe more profound. They wanted to make sure that they create a system that would interdict missile flights, and
yes.
This is what they were doing. And some of this could be mistaken for UFOs, not everything. The Soviets themselves did not understand everything that happened in their atmosphere.
Do you have any idea how far the Soviets got with weather control?
I think quite a lot. I think they've gotten quite a lot. But again, if they had succeeded completely, they would have been able to change weather patterns in Siberia or Russia. But you can see today that they have the same problems as anybody else does.
That's a good point. So they would have really changed the weather had they that power, but they actually did claim they could create a cyclone, and they claimed they could do it by satellite.
Maybe, but until we see results, we don't know. Also, please understand that so many findings of their experiments, I'm sure solid findings, were never implemented because there was not enough money, or there wasn't anybody with a strong hand to say, with a strong fist to say, go ahead and do it. That's the same problem. They had brilliant scientists, but bureaucratic system. Communism in itself cannot survive anywhere because it's a contradictory system. You have to give people initiative to be who they are. You can't put limits on people's minds. You can't tell people whatever you see in the sky, you don't see it. It's nothing, like they told Soviet soldiers. Don't report UFOs. 1972 Arctic areas of the Soviet Union.
Really?
They say, whatever you see in the sky, it doesn't exist. Don't tell us. So the soldiers would be laughing and say, okay. And, you know.
Well, it doesn't exist. Don't tell us.
Don't tell us. And that's why they perished.
Policy. There was some story about an ugly child that actually fell from the sky when some strange craft was reported hundreds of years ago.
This is one of the most interesting stories. It was, I think, in the 14th century, not far away from Kiev, where I'm from. A strange object was reported. It stayed for weeks in the sky. It was a dark red, sinister sphere that emitted rays. And then one day, using the old language, let's say, they said that an ugly child fell down into the river, and those who picked it up looked at it for many hours, but it was so ugly, so strange, so revolting to them that they put it back into the river. And
an ugly child.
Small, ugly being, let's using the mind of somebody from that time, and it could be an alien life form, humanoid alien life form, maybe something that was found in the Ural Mountains in the 90s. You understand how else people could relate to it? People of, Russia 700 years ago. But what's interesting is that reports like that came from different centuries of Russian history. Reports of strange things in the sky. Back in 1921 AD, an Arab traveler, I always mention it, this story, traveled to Russia, to the Volga region. There was a kingdom.
Yes.
And he saw, again, strange clouds, he and his fellow travelers, strange clouds and scenes of battles in the sky. And he was amazed, and local people were laughing and saying, don't be afraid, we see it all the time. And then you go into, let's say, 18th century, and a report of a spy, a Western spy, who saw this over St. Petersburg. Also something that looked, a huge cloud that came over the area. It was April 2, 1716, 9 o'clock in the sky. The sky was clear. All of a sudden, a strange, dense, and dark cloud appears in the northeastern portion of the sky. Its apex was sharp, very sharp-like. Its base was wide. It traversed the sky with great speed. And at the same time, from the north, another cloud, similar to the first one, appeared. It moved to the east, and it came to the first cloud, and they collided. And there was some sort of bright pillar that appeared between them and lasted for several minutes. This was a good report. Listen to this. Then both clouds crashed into each other with terrible force and appeared to have shattered from the strong impact. There was something else. There were flames, reported rays of flame. Also, eyewitnesses described that there was a giant shiny comet, because they couldn't describe it any other way. It was in the area, it appeared and rose to 12 degrees over the horizon. Very good report, still kept in the Russian archives. Those who want to find it will give the name. But something like that was observed in 1921 AD, and then, 800 years go by, again clouds. And then we have reports of the clouds from all over the Soviet Union. KGB could not understand what they were. Soviet intelligence could not understand what they were. Russian scientists like Plaksin, whom I mentioned before, did not know what to do. There was a cloud in 1974 over one of the most secret aircraft testing sites in Borisogledsk area. They could not. They had all the tools to study it, and they could not. Giant, immobile cloud over the area for a long time. They couldn't shoot it down. They had incidents when they tried to shoot down UFOs.
That's all very weird. This set of photographs that you've supplied for the website tonight, I'd like to know a little bit about them. This first one is kind of grainy, and it's a little difficult to see, but it appears to be some sort of gigantic machine doing what?
It's a movie prop, but people tried to make money saying it was an object shot down in 1983.
Huh.
And a lot of people believed it. Marina Popovich gave me the photograph. At the end, we found out it was nothing but a hoax story. But nothing is ever definite, because when it was hauled away under great secrecy, to a special institute near Moscow that actually studied UFOs, it was hauled away. Other things were reported in the institute. Information came out to one of the researchers, and we mentioned it, about a film that they also had in their hands that allegedly was produced by Hollywood, but they were not sure about a contact incident. So nothing is definite. But to give you the precise answer, this was a hoax. I wanted it to be there so people could understand. Things like that happen. So it
was a hoax, okay. As we come down in the photographs, we see not very good pictures, but pictures of saucer-like craft, right?
Mm-hmm.
By today's standards, of course, these are terrible photographs.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of their authenticity?
Probably not so authentic, one of them, but the one from 1961, nobody could explain. It appears over a secret, again, another secret area from nowhere, and it appears in parts, and then it disappears. What was it, an American spy satellite? I doubt it.
I don't know. It looks like it's got a piece missing out of it, doesn't it?
Yeah. And again, we only work we work with what we have. We have a lot more photos in the book, but not all of them are of the best quality. But they cannot be explained away very simply. And again, the first one, it's easy to explain.
Actually, the 1961 photograph, it's reminiscent of a couple of photographs that were taken not long ago. One lady took a photograph of something like this, with just like this, with a piece missing. It's very interesting, actually.
I'm more interested in the year 1961, but we can talk about it later. So many things happened in the Soviet Union, and including Mr. Manzel's book, which was published and distributed all over the Soviet Union. You don't know who I'm talking about.
No.
Donald Manzel, one of the biggest American debunkers. Maybe Menzel. I mean, I might not pronounce his name right. But, the Soviet Union was trying to hide UFOs so hard that they would go ahead and print, a book like that without any questions, without any, doubts. I'm telling you, they had a lot of cooperation.
Well, that's where I was just about to go and ask you how much real cooperation between the U.S. and the Soviet Union at that time on the subject of UFOs there really was. We all wonder about that, Paul.
I think from the tangible information available, quite a lot. But I'm sure there is so much more we don't know. Again, some points come clear, like the Phobos affair.
Yes.
We know about that. Also, the Manzel book, a few other incidents. Well, I was also interested in the conflict situations, how much the CIA was interested in what was going on in the Soviet Union. Quite a lot, police cases. Just those that have been declassified. I can only imagine what the CIA is hiding. I've got to tell you, we go case after case. And CIA was quite interested in the research. Back in 1950s, American agents reported back to Langley or whoever, wherever at the time, about UFOs sighted in different parts of the Soviet Union. And they were quite interested in the Iran-Soviet border and Chinese-Soviet border. UFOs have been reported there for many years, even before the Soviet Union existed. But especially in 1960s, 1970s, in the hot areas, so-called hot areas of the...
Well, the thing about this is, though, that if you imagine that these unidentified flying objects are man-made, as in Earth man-made, then that's exactly where they'd be flying, over potential areas of conflict, right? Hot areas, as you put it.
Yeah, but they've been flying there also for centuries before when there were no conflicts. I still don't understand what... But there may be different explanations because those mountains contain quite a lot of natural resources that are that could be useful to other beings too, and that's what some scientists believe and researchers. I just can't understand why such reports come back centuries after centuries.
Paul, with all the years of study you've done on the Soviet, now Russian side, Ukraine, all the rest of it, are you now convinced that some of the objects that we're seeing that we call UFOs are in fact alien spacecraft? Is there any doubt in your mind about that?
I have no doubt in my mind that another intelligence, not maybe ET, but an alien intelligence is here and is watching us, is watching what we're doing to the planet based, again, on the reports. And sometimes is trying to interfere. And such, we can name Chernobyl. I can name a small lake in the Central Asia that can destroy whole countries below if it ever bursts out. UFOs...
I'm not sure what you mean. A lake?
Lake Saris contains 17, I think, millions of cubic feet of water. It's being held in place by a dam. If that dam breaks down, water comes down the mountain, and with it, a number of countries below disappear because there's such a huge amount of water. It's a very strange formation. And Soviets who had studied American SDI tests in the atmosphere, they have a station. They had a station, a watch station in the area, and a lot of the reports they had was gigantic disc-like objects who would enter the waters of the Lake Sarez, go in and out. Why would they be interested in a lake on top of the Pamir Mountains? There is nothing there. Would it be that they want to prevent a natural catastrophe from happening?
Maybe.
Why would they be interested in coming to Chernobyl during the incident and a little bit after? Is it true that they tried actually to put down the fire in the reactor number 4? We have reports of people who were on site who swear that there was an object, a gigantic object over the reactor, and it actually helped abate the consequences of explosion.
Wow. I've heard none of this. I've never heard any of this, that a craft was over Chernobyl trying to mitigate in some way.
Art, we give dates, we give names, sometimes street addresses. The UFO came back to Chernobyl years after because it was a mess, and they kept, they were in that area, but not only to Chernobyl. Even the Voronezh case of 1989, strange aliens reported. Nobody in the West talked about a Soviet power station, nuclear power station in the area, and UFOs sighted over there too. And at the same time, we find out it's not of the safest power stations.
Paul, I would like to ask you, because I honestly don't know the truth about Chernobyl. How much land cannot be lived on by man? How much land around Chernobyl? How much of an area did it ruin?
I think in my heart, thousands upon thousands of kilometers. Because it's one thing what they say officially.
Yes.
Another thing that what is not being said. Sometimes not to scare people. But I do know that the whole areas of Belarus and areas in Ukraine, people cannot live there safely. Kids die. I mean, horrible news. We heard just a few days ago, we were told about young women in the area who died when they reach pregnancy, 4th month of pregnancy. As soon as they reach the 4th month of pregnancy, they die. And not one, but a few. And you know what? When I heard it...
I have to tell you, Paul, we're at the top of the hour, Paul. Hold on. When we get back, we'll try and get some of you on the air with Paul Stonehill. So much to learn and so little time. From the high desert in the middle of the night, which is where we talk of things just like this. This is Coast to Coast AM. I'm Art Bell.
The After Dark newsletter. Subscribe now by calling toll-free 1-888-727-5505.
Falling in love was the last thing I had on my mind. Holding you is a warmth that I thought I could never find. Just trying to decide. I'll stay by your side. I know I could try. I just can't find the answers to the questions that keep going through my mind. Hey, babe, isn't it time? It's the time to wait. Falling in love could be your mistake. Isn't it time? It's the time to wait. Falling in love could be your mistake.
Good morning, everybody. We have an expert on the Soviet side of, I don't know, this strange world we live in. His name is Paul Stonehill, and he knows a lot of their secrets. So if you have questions, and I can't imagine you don't based on what you've heard already, here are the numbers.
To talk with Art Bell, call the Wildcard line at area code 775-727-1295. The first-time caller line is area code 775-727-1222. To talk with Art Bell from east of the Rockies, call toll-free at 800-825-5033. From west of the Rockies, call 800-618-8255. International callers may reach Art by calling your in-country Sprint access number, pressing option 5, and dialing toll-free 800-893-0903. From coast to coast and worldwide on the Internet, this is Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell.
It is, and this radio program is unlike any other in the world, which, by the way, is why I think it works so well. I mean, where else do you hear stuff like this? We'll be right back with Paul Stonehill. Once again, Paul Stonehill's book, which obviously would require reading. If you've heard any of tonight's program and don't want to read that, I'd be quite amazed, offers apparently quite a bit of proof for what it contains. It's called UFO, USSR, and if you'd like a copy, it can be obtained by calling 888-953-2665. It's always fair to give a guest who is willing to come on and tell about these things. Sometimes you get a guest comes on and says, well, you want to know, read my book. Paul hasn't done that. He's stuck with this right through, so he deserves the plug, in my opinion. UFO, USSR, 888-953-2665. Now, Paul, just a couple of other questions before we go to the phones. And one is, in the Soviet, here in the U.S., we have people and so forth who claim to have UFO fragments, pieces of crashed UFO craft that are reportedly hidden at certain air bases here in the U.S., physical evidence, that kind of thing. What has happened to that, to the equivalent of that in Russia, in the Soviet Union?
Well, based on the report of Plaksin, who is one of their top researchers in the secret program, Setka program, that they never had any fragments. They wanted to, but they could not. Based on some other information we have, there are people who have artifacts from the sites of the alleged landings and maybe crashes. Some scientists, some researchers. I personally believe, and I put that information in my book, is that the Soviets had recovered something in their archaeological expeditions. They found things they never knew they would find, and they had studied them back in 1940s in at least 2 different places.
You mean things they dug up, things in the ice, things in the ground?
You got it. In Ukraine and also in Karelia, an area not far away from Finland, they found things that are of ancient origin, things that are ancient rocket ships, if we believe what is being reported. And there is some confirmation on the objects they found. For example, a microchip that was an object which could not be explained, presented to the Soviet academicians, top scientists in the 1950s. They couldn't know what it is. Today we know it's microchip. It might have come from the space rocket or whatever it was that was uncovered in Ukraine in 1948 and cut to several pieces and taken to a destination unknown.
1948, what an interesting year. And you're claiming they found a spacecraft, cut it up, and transported it.
Yeah, I don't claim it. I report what I know. But believe me, it's quite interesting. And again, it's interesting that there's ancient Indian books written in Sanskrit and designs and other things found aboard. It kind of leads you back to the Vimana aircraft and Mahabharata and a few other things.
It sure does. And boreholes. What are boreholes?
Things that are very hard to explain. Boreholes that appear in the wilderness, out of nowhere, but they are reported to be in such places after a UFO sighting or an alleged landing in the tundra, in the mountains, where there is no equipment to make such boreholes.
So you're telling me they have found very deep holes where they think something has entered the earth?
Possibly to take soil samples. That's what it is. And we have a military specialist who had dedicated his life to such research. And there is a small chapter about it, too.
Of all the things that you researched for your book, what was the most amazing?
The most amazing is the amount of information collected in the Soviet Union. And maybe mishandled, maybe not, but there are many, many sightings, very interesting sightings. And let's understand one thing. The Soviet Union was a totalitarian state, cut off from the rest of the world. Russian people were innocent, virgins when it came to UFO tabloids. They didn't know what it was. So when they reported something in the sky or over their nuclear silo, they would not say, oh, this is something that was reported in 47 by the Americans. No. They didn't, but they knew it was something that could not be explained.
What is, in the research, what is so specific about Russian ufology that doesn't have anything analogous?
Right.
No analogy here in the U.S. In other words, it went in a completely different direction?
I would say the predominance of gigantic forms, especially gigantic shapes of UFOs, such as cigar-shaped objects and huge discs, 200-300 meters in diameter, that appear over very interesting and very remote places. And unlike the United States, Russia it's a much larger country, and I gotta tell you, it has not been explored completely. There are faraway corners where nobody knows what's going on, but the reports come from those areas of UFOs.
All right, here we go. First time caller line, you're on the air with Paul Stonehill. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Jim, calling from KFYI, Phoenix, Arizona.
Yes, sir.
I was wondering if your guest may have ever heard of hypersonic pulse. Supposedly when the Soviet Union bowed down and backed out of the arms race, everybody was saying it was because they couldn't keep up with the United States due to the money factor and the SDI. I come from a long line of military family, and naturally when they all get together, the conversation always goes to the military.
Yes.
I remember listening one time, and this a retired colonel, uncle of mine, was saying that he just brought up that he said sound waves are an unbelievably powerful weapon if it can be used right. And he wouldn't elaborate a whole heck of a lot on it, but he actually sent an article that was written back in 1978 or 79, I believe, that the military had been testing this since the late 50s and early 60s. And it said that the article said that the technology that they were using was actually brought up or discovered through extraterrestrial or something like that.
All right. Well, let's hold it at that sort of basic question that you began with. Rather than having essentially gone broke, was there some technology that the Soviets saw the United States begin to possess that scared them so badly or affected them so much that they just threw up their arms and said, "We give up"?
I don't think so. I think they were exhausted in the race, that's true, but not because of the technology, because the economy was not functioning. Socialism doesn't work. That's the bottom line. As to answer your question directly, I have books from 1930s where the Soviets were describing their wish to have supersonic weapons or ultrasound weapons, but a wish is not a result. Nobody knows what secret experiments they had conducted and still do with this. I'm sure the Russian Navy is very much interested in anything like that.
All right. I honor your answer and agree with your answer all the way. Wildcard line, you're on the air with Paul Stonehill. Hi.
Hi, Art. You're still the master, Art. And Paul, good morning. My question to you is twofold. Number one, I had read during the Soviet era, unofficially, that a fleet of Soviet bombers struck at a target in which there was very heavy UFO activity. And I wonder if over the years you had ever heard or read or unofficially caught any glimpse of that type of story. And secondly, I saw a picture a number of years ago. I don't know if it was fraudulent or not, but it was a picture of a disc-shaped, very large disc-shaped object, and it was at a remote base at night, and the picture showed the Soviet symbol on the side of it. And I wonder if you had ever seen or heard of anything like that. And I appreciate your answer.
Thank you. Number one, Soviet Air Force had a number of incidents where they encountered UFOs and were foolish enough to attack them. After they've lost a few good aircraft, the command came down, do not fire on UFOs. Never do that. In Central Asia, along the Chinese border, we can go into dates. It's in the book, but if you want more, I can tell you now. As for the second part of your question, no, I've never heard about this.
But there is a history of the Soviets having shot at UFOs with apparently a poor result.
Poor results. 1953, 1960s, some cases are so mysterious that nothing has been reported. We do know more about the case of, I believe it was 1980, during the 1981, during the war of Saddam Hussein and the Persians fighting each other, and the Soviets in Afghanistan. Somebody got nervous when he saw a huge disc over his military unit, which was doing a secret test. So he said to hell with the instructions, I'm going to shoot at it.
You're right.
He did, and he suffered.
In what way?
Well, they lost, I believe at that time, they lost one or two aircraft, and he was demoted. So,
I see.
But lives did get lost. There came a point that when the Soviet High Command said no more. No, we don't want to touch them. And the Soviet top brass came out openly in 1990. During the perestroika time, they came out openly and said, yes, there are huge objects that fly over Moscow, 200 meters in diameter. We send our aircraft after them, but we warn them, don't do anything.
I wonder, Paul, how they would delineate or decide between a UFO and an American spy mechanism of some sort.
I think they knew a lot about the Americans and vice versa.
Huh.
Let's not be naive. And not only Americans, the Chinese too. The Chinese are very much interested and have been in what's going on the Soviet border next to them, especially when they see UFOs over their land and UFOs over Russia next door. And Mongolia, we have an excellent report. It was 1953. That's an interesting year, by the way. I believe 1951 or 1953. I can't recall now. It's in the book about a Soviet doctor who reported seeing a UFO landing, a huge disk, and strange beings that came from it. And the doctor was very scrupulous, very diligent. She wrote down what she saw. I like reports like that.
I like reports like that myself. East of the Rockies, you're on the air with Paul Stonehill. Good morning. Hello?
Hello, Art.
Yes.
Hello, Art and Paul. Yes, I'm calling from Delaware, Ohio.
Okay.
Listening to you at 610 WTBN in Columbus.
Yes, sir.
I was in the military, and of course I'm no longer in it now, but just before I was commissioned as a commissioned officer in the United States Army, we had our ROTC outing in West Virginia, and we looked up in the skies about 2 a.m. in the morning. We saw an oval-shaped object glowing in the evening sky, and the ranking officer, Major, told us do not say anything about it, which gave us the thought that, well, there is possibility of UFOs. Second thing, in relation to that, there's an area between Plain City, Ohio, and Delaware and Dublin, Ohio, which in the summertime there are discs being flown up above. You can tell by the lights they are disc-shaped, and with helicopters hovering in the immediate vicinity. I was wondering if our government and also the Russian government has some type of agreement with the occupants of who were or used to occupy those crafts, training us how to use them. Is there a possibility?
I think that's a very good question. We have our own reports in this country, indeed, of helicopters and the military being involved very quickly in sighting of craft and then even flying with them at times. Paul?
Yes, I believe so. I don't know if there is an agreement. I would be surprised if there wasn't some kind of a joint agreement on how to handle the UFOs. But I got to tell you that we listen to our report Soviet attempts to actually communicate with some of the objects and the ways they did it. And actually there was a response. A very interesting report.
Do you know, can you tell me about that response? And what?
They would indicate, they didn't go into all the details, but they would try to signal to UFOs, and the UFOs would contract and enlarge in response to that signal. That's very interesting. I wish I had more information. I have maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs about it. Please understand, a lot of this is so secret that doesn't leak out. But I think we have enough in the book about the military and the chapter about Soviet military and Soviet naval encounters to make people very much interested and to start thinking and to compare cases with other countries.
Well, that's important. West of the Rockies, you're on the air with Paul Stonehill. Good morning. Hello?
Hello, is this West of the Rockies?
It is.
Sorry, you had a beep right then.
Uh-huh.
This is Celinda, and I'm in Southern California. Good morning, Art and Paul.
Good morning.
Morning.
I just wanted to tell you a story. I believe we've had the mind and training weapons for some time. My mother, some years ago during the first Iraqi war, the Desert Storm, was incapacitated. She couldn't walk well, and she spent 24/7 in front of the television set. And CNN at that time was broadcasting that war live in real time.
That's right.
And she saw a group of jeeps, a rather small contingent of jeeps. She estimated about 100 people altogether, including the troops. And they were out in the middle of the desert heading for some spot, and apparently realized that dead ahead of them was a large army of enemy troops. And they got on the radio, and they radioed back to their base for help. And just a few minutes later, these huge Huey-type helicopters flew right over. I mean, they filmed it. They flew right over, headed over the hills where these troops were waiting for them. And within, she said it was about 10 to 15 minutes, all these troops came up over the hills with their arms raised in the air, and she said there were several thousand, and surrendered to about 100 people.
Yeah, I'm with you. There were some things like that occurred during Desert Storm that were almost just too much to believe about some of the surrenders. You know, you're just so right about that, ma'am. Paul?
I don't know if I can help much in this situation. Like I said, experiments were done. Soldiers died as a result, but at the same time they were able to change minds of soldiers who went back cheerfully to the fields of Afghanistan to fight.
Dart?
Yes.
May I ask one other, just a question, a quick one?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just real interested, since Russia has done the experimenting with the weather, if you or other Russian people that you know of have been experiencing what we are experiencing here and in Brazil and in Mexico and countries that I've been in, Canada as well, with all the lines in the sky and all of that. When they were doing their experiments, did they have that in their sky like we're having in ours?
Chemtrails and stuff?
Yes.
I think so. I believe so. But there is not enough information to make a precise conclusion, because those are one of the most secret experiments. Sometimes they affected areas around and coincided with UFO reports. So we kind of think that UFOs came to the area of the testing to study what's going on. It's very dangerous. We're messing with the atmosphere. One wrong step and that's it.
Yes, very dangerous indeed. Hold it right there, Paul. We'll be right back. I'm Art Bell, and this, of course, is Coast to Coast AM. Good morning.
Talk with Art Bell. Call the wildcard line at area code 775-727-1295. The first-time caller line is area code 775-727-1222. To talk with Art Bell from east of the Rockies, call toll-free at 800-825-5033. From west of the Rockies, call Art at 800-618-8255. International callers may reach Art Bell by calling your in-country Sprint access number, pressing option 5. And dialing toll-free 800-893-0903. From coast to coast and worldwide on the Internet, This is Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell.
You absolutely are getting a perspective and sort of a story on what's happened over the years in the Soviet Union when it was all blacked out, what's happening now in the former Soviet Union from somebody who really knows. Paul Stonehill. I'm Art Bell. We'll be right back. Once again, here's Paul Stonehill. And, Paul, I have a question for you. We had our program to put men on the moon. The Russians had a program to put men on the moon. What happened to the Russian program, to the Soviet program, to put men on the moon? A little mystery there.
Well, I know that they had developed the rockets to do it, and quite a lot of the good equipment to do it, but apparently Brezhnev was against it at the end, officially, and that the money was not in it, and a number of Soviet space engineers were quite upset, and people in the space race. But that's the latest program. Apparently, Stalin was very much interested in sending Russians to the moon. From different reports, from different quiet information sources, you can find out that something was going on, that Stalin had a special program, and the site of that program was actually where today's Chernobyl is. It was called Kiev 17.
Really?
Yes. And just before the German Nazis entered into the area in 1941, it was taken away in pieces, loaded on trains, and taken, I think, to the Ural Mountains. Nobody knows for sure.
The Ural Mountains.
But Stalin was very much interested in this, and he had his own Ministry of Aviation Research under his control, as contrary to the other one that existed, whose leaders were sent to the Gulag.
Why are Stalin's papers so secret still?
Because they contained, according to the Soviet state secrets, I can only surmise that they have reports of programs that we can't even imagine, or results from such programs. Plus, you have the legacy. History is very much important in Russia, like everywhere else, but maybe especially so in Russia. And Stalin is a very, very delicate personality to deal with. Half of the country wants him back. Maybe a third of the country hates him, and another third doesn't care.
Well, I would like to believe that you're now in a country where that kind of thing doesn't occur. But for 50 years after the assassination of President Kennedy, nobody sees any of that stuff. 50 years. Well, at least they put a number on it. We don't know when we'll ever get to see Stalin stuff. First-time caller line, you're on the air with Paul Stonehill. Hello. Hello?
Oh.
Yes?
Yeah. Yes, I have a very serious question for Paul about the mine war, different aspect.
I'm sorry, are you on some kind of talking, what kind of phone are you on?
On a cell phone.
A cell phone, okay. Well, get good and close to it and ask your question.
Okay, I just wanted to make a comment first on, if you want to know where it disappeared, maybe we should look at the Clinton Library in Arkansas. Because his Russian connections, and considering that China walked away with so many of our secrets and everybody was busy with Lewinsky. But with the mine wars, Paul, I read a book over 20 years ago, and it was titled Mine War. And it talked about psychic experience and how children were taught from kindergarten on in Russia how to develop their psychic ability to the point of using that against America, because we were so full of skeptics. We couldn't even discuss this.
Well, that is true. That is true. We didn't even talk about it, although we did have our own secret programs. Paul, is that true to that degree?
Not the kids. No, they wouldn't use the children, but they had quite a lot of their own military researchers that they could use, and did. to an extent. And I think the 1959 Nautilus story, some people believe this was an invention of the Soviet intelligence to fool Khrushchev into letting them expand their own programs.
Mm-hmm. In this country, Paul, we were treated just a very few years ago to an admission by the CIA that they had sponsored, an entire unit for 20 years. People able to look for objects and things at great distances and describe them. Was there a similar program in the Soviet Union? No doubt there would be.
No doubt, but let's understand one thing. Because of the stupidity of communism, they were afraid to admit paranormal phenomena for the most part. And people, those who had talents, kept them to themselves. At the same time, they had brilliant military commanders, like everywhere else, who wanted to use any weapons available at their disposal against the enemy.
Yes.
And they were doing their best to sponsor such programs, but time after time, Soviet institutions were disseminated, basically destroyed. In a literal form, those who wanted to study, telepathy and hypnotic phenomena and so forth suffered. So you had deep secret research, and at the same time you had people who were afraid to even wander into the direction of the paranormal because of communist ideology.
Okay. Wildcard Line, you're on the air with Paul Stonehill. Good morning.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, good morning, Art. Two great shows this weekend. Thank you. And
thank you.
Mr. Paul, thank you for sharing your information. And to get back to the space race and to the moon, did any of this information that you ran across have any connection to the assassination with President Kennedy at all?
All right. Why not? Did you run across anything that came on to that subject, the assassination of President Kennedy?
Actually, no. Actually, not. It was very people sympathized with him, and people read up as much as possible, but nothing secret was published in the Soviet Union, as far as I remember.
Okay. East of the Rockies, you're on the air with Paul Stonehill.
East of the Rockies?
Yep.
Oh, this is George.
Yes, George.
Aurora, Indiana. I am very honored to be on talking to you and Mr. Stonehill.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Stonehill, Nikola Tesla was doing some experiments, I think around that time. And I'm wondering if that, now, also, I think possibly a small antimatter meteor could have come down there. What are your views on that?
My views is that I list his research in the Tunguska chapter and what he was doing. So I'm not against it, but I want people to make up their own mind.
Caller, I think you and I may have read the same book. There are those who speculate that it could have been a small bit of antimatter just because of the nature of the explosion, the radiation observed, the defects in biological entities observed, the magnetic anomalies. It just doesn't add up to be what they originally said it was. You agree with that, Paul?
Absolutely.
Certainly.
It was no comet. I don't know for sure what it was, but it was no comet. Nothing like that. It could have been Tesla's experiments. Nobody says no. He was doing it in 1908, and there are reports that he wanted to show his abilities, but he wanted to do it over a remote area, as Siberia was.
Well, he picked one, if that was it, and it was very impressive, though he did not claim it, did he?
Not as far as I know. There were some hints, but I don't think he outright claimed it. People would do it in his name.
West of the Rockies, you're on the air with Paul Stonehill. Good morning.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm calling from Richard C. Hoagland Country, Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Welcome.
All right.
Hi. Paul Stonehill, it's a pleasure to speak with you, and Art, I'm so happy you're back on the air.
Thank
on
you.
the weekends. I really am. Anyway, Mr. Stonehill, it sounds like you've done a tremendous amount of work, like a lifetime of work on this, on the UFOs, and you were talking a little bit about mind control, and that was the area that wanted to ask a question about, and somebody else sort of asked the question, but because a friend of mine who had a lot of equipment, he was a biologist and a psychologist, and he did 10% of his work in pain control. He had, like in the early 90s, alpha wave chambers, all kinds of much more sophisticated equipment than most people.
Okay, and your question for Paul
He
is?
went to Russia. He was writing a book. He was collaborating with a Russian scientist, and it had to do with mind control over pain.
Uh-huh.
And he was very happy, and within 1 month of coming home, he went in the woods and shot himself. And it's sort of, I was wondering, could it be because the attitude in Russia was against his work?
Well, first of all, it's very difficult to comment on any single given case and an outcome like that particularly. However, I can understand that somebody involved in control of the mind for pain might run into or be interested in the experiments of others who had done various forms of mind control as a natural course of their own investigation. Right, Paul?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They had used, the Soviets had used medical institutes to run the secret side of the mind control program. Perhaps you could get Fate magazine to allow you to put my 1994 article on your site. I know that it was being used by a U.S. military college, Naval College, as a reference material. I'm very proud. It's not the best, it's a good research work, and now I would have added much more. But I think even what you will see there will be enough to fascinate a lot of people and maybe answer some questions.
Perhaps so. First time caller line, you're on the air with Paul Stonehill.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi, this is, my name is Brett. I'm from Kennewick, Washington.
Okay.
This question's for both of you. I was wondering, with the retrieval of UFOs and everything, do you think that there was an influence in our technology? Because it sure did seem to explode after the 50s.
An absolutely fair question. In other words, has alien technology been injected into our society in view of the way it's gone since about 1950, as he points out, or even earlier? It's been an explosion of knowledge. Maybe it's all our own, or is there an influence from elsewhere, Paul?
I believe on the information presented in the book that you could draw that conclusion, and some do. There is a military engineer specialist by the name of Smirnov who actually mentions Soviets using such technology for the enhancement of their rockets and engines. How true, I don't know, but he goes into great detail. Generally, I think it's quite possible. I don't think we know what transistors are even today, and a few other scientific innovations.
Well, here we had a man named Colonel Corso. I'm sure you're familiar with that name.
Yes.
And he came on my program in a series of programs, Paul, and told me a very convincing story about how he was given access to extraterrestrial items that were then back engineers as much as possible. And when a use was seen in private industry for them, that knowledge was passed from Colonel Corso to an individual in private industry, things that resulted in many of the modern amazing things that we have now. I don't know if that's true, but he told a very, very convincing story.
And I told you today about a microchip that the Soviet scientists had
Yes.
looked at in the 1950s.
Yes. Yes, so it may have gone on all over the world for all we know. West of the Rockies, you're on the air with Paul Stonehill. Hello.
Yes, I would like to, this is Dave, Hippie Dave over in Madera, California. And
Yes.
I'd like to ask the guest if he's ever heard of the Silva mind control.
Silva
Art?
mind control.
I have a question for Art. Art, when did you move from Las Vegas into your new studio?
Oh, over a decade ago, sir.
That's when I started listening to you, Geo, go up and down that hill.
Uh-huh. All right. Paul?
No.
No, he's never. Okay, that's the answer. First time caller line, you're on the air with Paul Stonehill.
Hi. Listen, my name is Rocky. I'm a little afraid to talk to you. I'm worried I may be put in jail or an asylum or something. But I'm going to talk to you anyway. I know how they manipulate the weather and cause it to rain.
Who's they?
Well, people that put satellites up in the sky, whoever they are, the government or NASA, whoever they are. Basically, I thought of it at the time as a satellite that rotates. I was watching the news, and they said they had upper turbulence, and that was causing rain. So, to be perfectly honest with you, I have an implant in me, and I'm a little worried about talking about all this, but it caused a hurricane because it was like a whip. It was the satellite rotated and caused turbulence in the upper atmosphere, and it caused a hurricane at the time. Remember Hurricane Andrew?
Mm-hmm.
It was just before then when it happened.
And so you think they're probably going to hear you talking to me about all this on the air and burst your implant?
No. Actually, those things could torture you via satellite because you're located with them wherever you are. And I got it put in the VA. I heard them saying they would put it in. Basically, they were taking off a mold at the time.
And, you think our own government, our VA, did this to you?
Oh, I know they did.
All right. Well, I appreciate the call, sir. I'm willing to entertain the possibility of weather control or even to some degree mind control, but I don't know about mixing them and our own VA doing it. Wildcard line, you're on the air with Paul Stonehill. Hello.
Yes. I have a question. Does he see a relationship between demonology and ufology?
That's a good question.
And also, if you could play the Siberian Hole with the sounds of tortured souls.
Not this moment, sir, but I will ask your first question. And that. So, what do you think, Paul? I mean, all across America, in the kind of fields that we're talking about this morning, subjects we're talking about this morning, there are many who believe that these things that we see in our skies, these things that we find completely inexplicable, are not the work of man at all, or extraterrestrials, but rather demons.
Well, they're free to believe whatever they want. You know, my research was mainly focused on what Soviet scientists and military specialists thought about.
I understand.
So I don't want to even get into it. You know, you may want to get into the Third Reich and their research. I think they had a lot of demonology involved, but also very interesting results.
Yes, but certainly that's one of the possible answers to some of the apparitions, some of the things that are seen. Sure. It's got to be considered one of the possibilities, unless we actually have a little green guy that we can interview to know there's an alien life form here. Short of that, that's got to be one of the possibilities.
Art, an alien life form could also exist at the bottom of the oceans, as Mariana Trench, and a few other places, and I've written about it, again, based on Soviet reports, and maybe we can talk about it some other time, but believe me, there is more than an ET explanation for an alien life form.
All right, my friend, that's a place to end. You've been an excellent guest, Paul. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, and feel free to call me anytime.
You bet. Good luck with your book. Paul Stonehill. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid that's it for this weekend. It's been a real winner. From the high desert, I'm Art Bell. We'll be here, of course, next weekend. Till then, good night, all.
Midnight in the desert, shooting stars across the sky. This magical journey will take us on a ride, filled with the longing, searching for the truth. Will we make it to tomorrow? Will the sun shine on you?